Tesla just made an announcement that should send shockwaves through every state in America, but chances are you haven't heard about it. The company is shutting down its planned expansion of one of the most significant electric vehicle manufacturing sites in the country. This isn't happening because sales are down or because the technology failed. It's happening because the regulatory environment became so hostile, so expensive, and so impossibly complex that continuing operations in California no longer made financial sense. And what makes this story critical is that it's not an isolated incident. This is the opening chapter of something much larger, a fundamental shift in where companies choose to build, invest, and create jobs in this country. I'm going to walk you through exactly how this happened, step by step, decision by decision, because understanding this timeline is essential to grasping what's coming next. This is investigative journalism that follows the money and the consequences, and if that's what you're looking for, you need to subscribe right now. Hit that like button and drop a comment below with your answer to this question. Do you think state leadership will take any responsibility for what's unfolding, or will they simply point fingers elsewhere? Let me know what you think. Here's what we're dealing with. Tesla's decision to abandon its Fremont expansion facility, a project designed to manufacture 500,000 vehicles every single year, is the direct consequence of a regulatory structure that actively punished growth, imposed compliance costs that no reasonable business could absorb, and created incentives for the company to move operations to states that actually want manufacturing jobs. This isn't political spin. This is economics. This is basic math. And over the course of this investigation, I'm going to show you the timeline, the financial decisions, and who ends up paying the price for all of this. Let's go back to where this started. In early 2021, Tesla announced ambitious plans to expand its Fremont facility with an entirely new production line focused on the next generation of battery electric vehicles. The expansion was supposed to add 4,000 jobs to the local economy, increase annual production capacity by 500,000 units, and establish California as the undisputed global leader in electric vehicle manufacturing. At the time, the governor praised it as a historic investment in the state's clean energy future. Local officials celebrated. Environmental advocacy groups issued statements of support. On paper, this looked like a win for absolutely everyone involved. Then reality started to set in. To actually build this expansion, Tesla needed approval from multiple state and local regulatory agencies. We're talking about the California Air Resources Board, the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, the California Coastal Commission, the Department of Toxic Substances Control, and the Regional Water Quality Board. Each of these agencies operates with its own review process. Each one functions on its own timeline. And critically, each one has the authority to delay or outright deny the entire project. Tesla submitted its initial permit applications in March of 2021. By September of that same year, 6 months later, not a single permit had been approved. The company had already spent more than $80 million on legal fees, environmental consultants, and mandatory compliance reports, and they still hadn't broken ground on a single structure. What does that tell you? It tells you that California's regulatory framework is structurally designed to slow down construction, not facilitate it. Even when a project directly aligns with the state's publicly stated climate objectives, the bureaucratic machinery treats it like a potential threat that must be exhaustively scrutinized. Meanwhile, while Tesla was stuck in this permit limbo in California, the company was simultaneously in discussions with officials in Texas and Nevada. The contrast was stark. In Texas, state officials offered a 15-year property tax abatement, expedited permitting processes, and direct infrastructure investments totaling more than $200 million. In Nevada, the incentives were similarly compelling. Discounted industrial electricity rates, streamlined environmental reviews, and a promise of permit approval within 6 months. 6 months. In California, Tesla was still waiting for its first approval. Let that comparison sink in for a moment. By early 2, Tesla made a strategic calculation. The company formally announced it would relocate its headquarters from Palo Alto, California, to Austin, Texas. The official statement cited business flexibility and operational efficiency. But anyone following the situation closely understood what that actually meant. California had become too expensive, too slow, and too difficult to operate in. Within weeks of that announcement, Tesla also revealed it would prioritize expansion efforts in Texas and Nevada over California. The Fremont expansion project was quietly placed on hold, with no clear timeline for resuming. Then, in April of 2022, California passed Assembly Bill 1346, a new regulation mandating that all manufacturing facilities in the state achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2030. On the surface, this might sound reasonable. After all, who would oppose clean manufacturing? But the mechanism for compliance is where the problem becomes clear. To meet the requirements, facilities would need to retrofit or entirely replace existing power systems, install on-site renewable energy infrastructure, purchase carbon offset credits for any emissions that couldn't be eliminated, and submit to annual third-party audits. The estimated cost to bring a facility the size of Tesla's Fremont plant into compliance was over $600 million. And the deadline was 8 years away. Think about what this means in practical terms. California just informed one of the world's most prominent electric vehicle manufacturers, a company literally producing the cars that are supposed to reduce global emissions, that they needed to spend an additional $600 million to meet an emissions target, even though the vehicles themselves produce zero tailpipe emissions during operation. The state passed legislation that effectively penalized the very industry it claimed to champion. Tesla ran the numbers. When you combine the compliance costs for Assembly Bill 1346 with the ongoing delays in permitting, the higher labor costs driven by unionization efforts, and the rising cost of commercial real estate in the Bay Area, the Fremont expansion stopped making financial sense. The company calculated that producing vehicles in California would cost approximately $4,000 more per unit compared to producing the identical vehicle in Texas. At a projected volume of 500,000 units annually, that's a $2 billion cost disadvantage. No company, regardless of profitability, can absorb that kind of structural gap and remain competitive in the market. So, in June of 2023, Tesla made the official announcement. The Fremont expansion project was canceled. The company would instead invest in a new gigafactory in Austin, Texas, with long-term plans to gradually shift the majority of its North American production out of California entirely. 4,000 planned jobs disappeared overnight. The local tax revenue that Fremont had been projecting, estimated at over $30 million per year, evaporated. And the broader economic consequences began cascading through the region. This is where the story moves from a single corporate decision to a systemic economic problem. Because Tesla didn't operate in isolation, the company sits at the center of an enormous supply chain involving hundreds of other businesses: battery manufacturers, electric motor suppliers, charging component producers, interior materials companies. All of these suppliers had been planning their own expansions in California specifically to support the Fremont project. When Tesla pulled out, those plans collapsed as well. A battery manufacturer in San Jose that was preparing a new facility and hire 1,200 workers scrapped the entire project. A semiconductor company in Sunnyvale that had been negotiating a supply contract worth $300 million walked away from the deal. A logistics company in Oakland that was preparing to handle increased shipping volume for the expanded plant laid off 200 employees. When you add up all the indirect effects, analysts estimate that Tesla's decision led to the loss of more than 15,000 jobs across California's manufacturing and technology supply chain. But the damage didn't stop there. Tesla's exit prompted other manufacturers to ask themselves a very uncomfortable question. Why are we still operating here? A major aerospace manufacturer based in Long Beach announced in August of 2023 that it would relocate production facilities to Arizona, explicitly citing regulatory uncertainty and rising operational costs. A pharmaceutical company in San Diego moved operations to North Carolina. A food processing company in Fresno shifted production to Idaho. Each departure stripped jobs, tax revenue, and economic activity out of California. And each move sent an unmistakable signal to other companies considering expansion or relocation. If you want to grow your business, you need to leave this state. The economic ripple effects of Tesla's departure weren't just theoretical projections on spreadsheets. They translated into real human consequences for thousands of people who had built their lives around the promise of stable manufacturing employment. Take Daniel Cortez, a senior manufacturing technician who had been working at Tesla's Fremont plant for 7 years. He was planning to apply for one of the new positions in the expansion facility. That job would have come with a 15% pay increase, improved benefits, and a clear pathway to a supervisory role. Daniel had just purchased a house in Tracy, facing a 40-minute commute each direction, banking on that promotion to make the mortgage payments manageable. When the expansion was canceled, that promotion vanished. His hours were reduced from 40 per week to 32, as Tesla scaled back operations at the existing facility. His mortgage payment remained exactly the same. His income dropped by 20%. Within 6 months, he was falling behind on payments. He eventually sold the house at a significant loss and moved his family into a rental apartment. In an interview with local media, he said he felt betrayed by a state that constantly claims to prioritize working families. Or consider Maria Santos, who owns a small diner just 3 blocks from the Fremont plant. Her entire business model depends almost exclusively on Tesla employees who stop in for breakfast and lunch during their shifts. When the expansion was canceled and existing shifts were reduced, her revenue dropped by 40% practically overnight. She laid off 3 of her 5 employees. She cut her own working hours. She stopped taking any salary at all. By late 2024, she was seriously considering closing the business permanently, and she's far from alone in this situation. Throughout Fremont, small businesses that built themselves around serving the plant, coffee shops, gas stations, auto repair facilities, childcare centers, have watched their customer base disappear. The economic destruction spreads outward in every direction. It is like cracks in glass. Now, here's the part that makes this situation truly absurd, and it's the aspect that nobody in Sacramento wants to acknowledge or discuss publicly. California passed Assembly Bill 1346 specifically to reduce industrial emissions and accelerate the transition toward clean energy. The stated objective was to position California as the greenest state in the entire nation. But here's what actually happened as a result of that policy. By driving out one of the largest electric vehicle manufacturers in the world, California guaranteed that more cars would be manufactured in states with significantly dirtier energy grids. Texas, for example, still generates more than 40% of its electricity from natural gas and coal. Nevada is marginally better, but still depends heavily on fossil fuel generation. The carbon footprint of manufacturing a Tesla vehicle in Texas is substantially higher than manufacturing the identical vehicle in California, where the electrical grid is considerably cleaner. In other words, California's climate policy didn't reduce emissions at all. It simply exported them to other states. Let that reality settle in for a moment. But the situation gets even worse. With Tesla scaling back operations in Fremont and no new electric vehicle manufacturers willing to invest in California, the state is now falling behind its own legally mandated climate targets. California law requires that all new passenger vehicles sold within the state must be zero emission by 2035. To achieve that goal, the state needs a massive increase in electric vehicle production capacity. But instead of building that capacity, California is actively watching it relocate to other states. By 2025, industry analysts were issuing warnings that California would not have sufficient domestic electric vehicle production to meet consumer demand, forcing the state to import vehicles from out of state or potentially from overseas manufacturers. The state that positioned itself to lead the clean energy revolution is now dependent on other regions to supply the very technology it legally mandated. The irony is almost too perfect. So why did this happen? How did California, a state with the world's fifth largest economy, state that essentially invented the modern technology industry, end up driving away one of its most strategically important manufacturers? The answer isn't simple, but it fundamentally comes down to three critical failures in governance. First, regulatory sprawl. California has layered so many environmental, labor, and safety regulations on top of each other that it has become nearly impossible to build anything with any reasonable speed. Even when a project delivers clear environmental benefits, it still must navigate an incomprehensible maze of agencies, review processes, and potential legal challenges. The inevitable result is delay, cost overruns, and profound uncertainty. Companies despise uncertainty. When they cannot reliably predict timelines or costs, they relocate to environments where they can. Second, ideological overreach. California's political leadership has become so deeply committed to progressive policy objectives that they have completely lost sight of practical, economic trade-offs. Yes, we should maintain high environmental standards. Yes, we should protect worker rights and safety. But when those standards become so inflexible that they make profitable operation economically impossible, you don't achieve progress. You achieve exodus. Effective policy must balance ideals with economic reality. California forgot that fundamental principle. Third, fiscal mismanagement. California collects more tax revenue than almost any other state in the country. Yet it consistently runs substantial budget deficits. Why? Because the state spends money faster than it generates revenue, and it categorically refuses to cut costs during difficult economic periods. Instead, it raises taxes on remaining businesses, which drives more companies to leave, which further shrinks the tax base, which necessitates even higher taxes on whoever remains. It's a vicious downward spiral, and Tesla's departure functions as both a symptom and an accelerant of that destructive cycle. Now let's discuss what happens next, because this story is nowhere near finished. Tesla's exit has already triggered a cascade of secondary consequences, and we're only beginning to see the full scope of the economic damage. In October 2024, California's Employment Development Department reported that manufacturing employment in the state had declined for 12 consecutive months, representing the longest sustained decline since the 2008 financial crisis. The state lost more than 60,000 manufacturing jobs in a single year. Unemployment in manufacturing-dependent regions like the Central Valley and the Inland Empire spiked above 9%. Meanwhile, during that same period, Texas added more than 40,000 manufacturing jobs. The jobs didn't disappear from existence. They simply moved to a different state. By early 2025, California's commercial real estate market began experiencing serious structural problems. With fewer companies operating in the state, demand for industrial space collapsed. Vacancy rates in major industrial parks surrounding Los Angeles, San Francisco, and San Diego reached historic highs. Property values dropped by 30% in some areas. Developers who had borrowed heavily to construct new facilities found themselves severely underwater on those investments. Several major real estate investment trusts publicly announced they were pulling out of California entirely, citing fundamentally unsustainable market conditions. Translation: nobody wants to build anything here anymore. Then, in March 2025, the credit rating agencies entered the picture. Moody's downgraded California's bond rating from AA2 to AA3, explicitly citing long-term fiscal imbalances and declining economic competitiveness. Fitch issued a similar downgrade 2 weeks later. What does that mean in practical terms? It means California now must pay higher interest rates to borrow money, which increases the state's debt service costs, which leaves less money available for schools, roads, and essential public services, which necessitates more budget cuts, which drives more people and businesses to leave. The downward spiral accelerates. And here's what makes this truly maddening. The governor's office has spent the entire past year attempting to spin this disaster as a temporary market correction. They've blamed federal policy. They've blamed corporate greed. They've blamed climate change itself. But they have steadfastly refused to take any responsibility whatsoever for the policies that directly caused this situation. In a press conference held in April 2025, the governor was asked directly whether California's regulatory environment played any role in Tesla's departure. His response was revealing. He said, "We make no apologies for holding corporations accountable to the highest environmental and labor standards. In other words, we would do exactly the same thing again." But here's the fundamental reality check that nobody in leadership wants to confront. Accountability without economic competitiveness is simply slow-motion economic suicide. You can impose the highest standards in the entire world, but if nobody can afford to meet them, you don't achieve clean industry. You achieve no industry at all. And when you have no industry, you have no jobs. And when you have no jobs, you have no tax base. And when you have no tax base, you cannot fund the social programs you claim to care so deeply about. This isn't complicated political theory. This is elementary mathematics. So where does this leave us? Let me walk through the chain of events one more time because it's crucial to understand how each piece connected to the next. California imposed a complex, slow, and prohibitively expensive regulatory system on manufacturers. Tesla attempted to navigate that system and determined it was financially unsustainable. Tesla relocated operations to states with simpler regulations and lower costs. Other manufacturers observed this and followed. California lost jobs, tax revenue, and economic momentum. The state responded by raising taxes and cutting public services, which only accelerated the exodus of businesses. The fiscal crisis deepened further, and the spiral continues with no end in sight. Through all of this, California's leadership has refused to acknowledge that their policies created the problem. Here's the broader warning that extends far beyond California's borders. What happened here is not unique or unrepeatable. It's a case study in how ideologically driven policy that's completely disconnected from economic reality can destroy widespread prosperity in less than a decade. Other states are watching this unfold. Other countries are watching. And the lesson is absolutely clear. If you want to attract investment, create sustainable jobs, and build a genuinely prosperous economy, you have to make it actually possible for businesses to succeed. You cannot regulate your way to utopia. You cannot tax your way to prosperity. And you cannot simply ignore fundamental economic trade-offs and expect good outcomes. So here's my question for you, and I genuinely want to see this discussion in the comments section. Who do you think bears responsibility for this disaster? Is it the state legislature that passed economically unworkable laws? Is it the governor who defended and continues to defend those laws? Is it the regulatory agencies that deliberately slow-walked every single permit? Or is it the voters who kept electing leaders who promised impossible outcomes? Drop your answer below, because meaningful accountability begins with clearly identifying and naming the problem. And if you've made it this far through this investigation, you absolutely need to subscribe to this channel. This is the kind of detailed follow-the-money journalism that corporate media outlets will never touch. Hit that subscribe button right now. Share this video with everyone you know. The algorithms actively try to suppress this kind of content, so we need your direct help to get it in front of as many people as possible. Because here's the fundamental truth. This story is still being written in real time. Tesla's departure is just the opening chapter. The decisions being made right now in Sacramento, in Austin, in corporate boardrooms across the country, those decisions will determine whether California can possibly recover or whether this spiral continues until the state becomes unrecognizable. And the clock is ticking, the dominoes are still falling, and the people in positions of power are still pretending everything is perfectly fine. It's not fine. And it's long past time we all started paying very close attention.